Hi, I'm Jim. Welcome to the Unbound Performance Podcast, where we explore the world of sports and performance mindset training.
And I'm Caroline. Each week, we talk about the strategies, habits, and mental framework that help us to excel. Let's get into today's episode. So, we already have an extreme ownership episode. That one was much more focused on the book and what it is. And I think a lot of people probably hear extreme ownership as just taking responsibility for your actions instead of for taking responsibility for your experience. I think that's two different things.
And also, I think the whole notion of extreme ownership is only talked about from all the great things about it, and there aren't any. Well, I mean, the guys who talk about it a lot definitely talk about the other side of it, where you can take too much ownership, and especially in a leadership sense, where you're not allowing for leadership development, growth. You're not empowering people beneath you to
take their own responsibility. I think that is the hard, the double-edged sword, I guess, is in a way, you taking extreme ownership over your team or your other leaders that are below you is a form of leadership. But that's something I think about a lot when you're talking about it, and that if you don't allow them to take responsibility, then they aren't able to have their own version of extreme ownership, when maybe in reality, I get the story, the example from the friendly fire situation, but every time you say that story, I think to myself, well, sure, he can take responsibility, but at the same rate, they didn't take their own. And if he goes so far that direction to where they're like, oh, well, I guess it's not our fault, and they become too dependent on their leader or too much relying on well, if we screw up, it's not I feel like that could go the wrong direction.
I think when it goes bad, the person at the top accepting responsibility that's the way you want to go.
Sure.
I know there was a guy who was a Marine commandant named General Al Gray, and when he was commandant, there was a helicopter crash that killed a number of Marines, and he went to the funeral and he told all their family members that he was the one who was responsible for it, and even though he wasn't there. It's just, I think that's an honorable quality that inspires people. Now, what that can't turn into is some kind of control freak situation where you're always taking responsibility in terms of how it's acted out. And I mean, I think you see that in the business world, and you see it one or the other, where it's total hands off, and then you blame, they screwed it up.
Or the complete opposite.
Total opposite.
Yeah.
Where you never give anyone room to breathe and you just dominate. And I don't know, I think people don't like working for both. Well, either one.
Yeah, either one.
Definitely. Sure. So it requires some level of trust in the control freak sense.
After our session last night, I was texting with, and I think when you're trying to establish extreme ownership in your own life, where you're like, okay, I'm going to do these things, her response was I need to do better. I need to do it differently. And I suggested to her, I said, sure, if you feel like there are different things you can try, then by all means try it. But sometimes I think it's just the persistence of the effort. I think we tend to look for okay, that didn't work that one time, so no, let's try this way now. And then it just becomes this nagging, trying to get someone on board when it's just not working, versus just picking your course of action and being persistent in that. I think can also be a form of ownership. Doesn't, just because it didn't work the first time doesn't mean it's doomed to not be successful. So I think it also requires some little persistence, rather than trying to think that if it didn't work, I'm not doing it right, or I'm not being a good leader. It might just be that the persistence of it.
Yeah, I think sometimes the extreme ownership phraseology is appealing to people who are particularly hard on themselves and do take that approach where this is working, it's my fault, I'm screwing this up, now what? And I mean, obviously you want to feel like you have agency in whatever pursuit you're involved with. But I think the perseverance, and it may be you learn quickly that this way isn't going to work, but there is a way that will work. And I think that's where you have to, it requires ownership.
Yeah. Well, as someone who tends to be a perfectionist or hard on myself, but as you're saying that, I don't really I mean, there are things I certainly beat myself up about, but when it comes to like a task, for example, if it's not succeeding, I don't tend to like say like, well, you suck. I just like find another way. That's so I think the idea of extreme ownership is either like needs to be taken on also in a way that's not like, okay, this is all my fault and so I'm bad and therefore I need to fix it, versus maybe a more like affirmative way of seeing it of,
Right.
okay, this isn't working out, but I know I can figure it out and let's try this instead. The negative messaging versus the just forward thinking kind of growth messaging to yourself, I think can make a huge difference in that department.
Yeah, and that's I think people who are driven are going to be hard on themselves. You just have to make that work for you. Um, and so in the ownership thing, it's good. You are responsible,
Yeah.
but again, you want to make that work for you instead of beating yourself up. Or I mean, everybody's going to have frustrations,
Right.
and you just have to keep getting after it, or maybe ask for help, or and sometimes an extreme ownership thing, someone maybe if they're like super into that approach, they may be less apt to seek.
Seek counsel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, maybe their ego's involved, maybe they feel insecure, or
I think that's a nuance of it as well. Is like, are you taking extreme ownership from an ego perspective, where you want to have either the praise, or in order to get the praise, you have to also take the falls when they fall, or is it for the benefit of others, the extreme ownership of being a good leader and setting that example? I think you can have different motives for taking that on.
yeah, and I mean, requires that you trust the people that
Yeah.
you're in this with, and sometimes people don't want to do that. They're like, especially if a perfectionist sense, they'll this has to be perfect. It reflects on me. I'm not letting someone screw this up with my name on it. And I get that. It's just not a very sustainable model for leadership. And sometimes there may be like an emergency where you've got to come in, but that shouldn't be the model for year after year after year.
Yeah.
And trying to help the people you're working with become more effective leaders should be part of your goal rather than just, all right, get out of the way.
Yeah.
I'm doing this. We've got a deadline, and sometimes that has
Sometimes
to
that, right.
happen. It does, but just at least being aware of that and trying to, whenever possible, allow opportunity for growth and learning.
In a organization or setup where there is like, let's just call it rank. There's one at the very top, maybe there's two or three below, and then there's 10 below them. And as a leader who decides to take on extreme ownership, as if there's a situation where your subordinates might never be the top leader like you are, how can you demonstrate extreme ownership and also teach them to do it for their support? Like, how do you allow your leaders who are maybe below you but are still very much leaders in their whatever, down the line, to let them practice that same thing if the person at the very tip top is doing it?
Doing what?
Like if the person at the very top of the pyramid, let's just call it pyramid scheme, if you will, is practicing, is what we call it,
Mm-hmm.
practicing extreme ownership
Yeah.
in a way where they're never going to let let their subordinates take the blame or take the heat. What if those subordinates that are level 2 want to also practice extreme ownership,
Sure.
and they've got someone above them who's like, no, no, it's my fault?
Well, they may be.
As the top leader, how do you have that finesse, if you will, to be able to practice it for yourself and demonstrate leadership, but also allow them to practice that if they
Well, they'll
so
have
choose?
opportunity with the level 2 type leaders will have opportunity to do that for their level 3
Sure.
type leaders. So it
I guess I'm thinking if the person at the very top, though, thinks they are responsible for everyone from level 1 down to level 15.
right, as long as it's an environment where people are allowed to demonstrate competence,
Yeah.
and get better at learning how to lead. And I think just because the person at the very top is really into the extreme ownership thing doesn't mean that there's not an opportunity for anyone else to also
Right.
do that. But it's not the only aspect of leading. I mean, to go back to Jocko Willink's thing, he talks a lot about decentralized command. So that that is where you're not hovering and dominating every
Mm-hmm.
last task, but you're allowing your good people to go do their good work. And I think you're responsible in an extreme ownership sense in that, like, make sure you train them and
Right.
make sure you're there if they have questions, things like that. But empowering them so that they are stretched and they learn and grow and get better and better, that should be a huge part of what you're doing as the person in charge or whatever. Sometimes our egos get in the way when instead we have to realize like one person at the top isn't going to be there forever.
Mm-hmm.
And if you leave and there's a vacuum of competence and leadership, well, that's your fault.
Right.
Like, um, and so you don't want to, if you care about the health of the organization, whatever it is, you don't want to do that. I mean, you want to provide opportunity for the people, quote unquote, under you to grow, flourish, learn, and become everything they can be. Like, it's one of the goals of, I mean, when people find meaning in their work, mastery is one of the things that they're typically citing as very important to them. Well, nobody gets to master anything if they never have opportunity to get in there and make some mistakes and learn and grow as a result.
We talked a little bit about this in the beginning, but the idea it's not just extreme ownership in a leadership position where you're doing it for the benefit of others necessarily, but also for you to have that agency and control over your own experience. Maybe we talk about that a little bit when it comes to sports and being on a team and different new environments when it, switching teams or clubs or schools, and how it doesn't have to just be like, well, I'm going to take the blame for everything that goes wrong, but I'm also going to take ownership of my experience and what this is going to look like for me.
Yeah, I think that's a good example, like being on a new team or something like that. I mean, I've heard often, well, I don't have any friends on this team. Nobody likes me. What have you done to make friends?
Yeah.
Like, if you stand over in the corner and don't talk to anyone, it's hard for you to give off a vibe that you want to be there and be a part of it. But I think regardless, whether it's a youth sports kind of example like that or whatever, even when you walk into high school and you're a freshman on the team, or walk into a college setting and you're a freshman on the team, like, what are you doing
to find your place?
And I think that's where you're responsible for helping create the environment that you want to be a part of. And if you're just going to kind of make excuses and find reasons why it's not happening that could well be within your control, then that's just very unsatisfying. And that goes back to, like, you have one life, or you have, like, from a playing experience, you have a really limited time. And why waste any of it kind of settling for what it is instead of making it as good as it can be?
Yeah. And then we talk a lot about, like, having the hard conversations or sticking up for a teammate, or, and what often gets said is, like, you don't want to leave here not having, looking back saying, I wish I had, fill in the blank. I think too, from a culture perspective, like, if the team isn't what you hope it is, or the coaching situation isn't what you hope it is, or you've got a player you don't get along with, I think taking extreme agency, extreme ownership over your experience helps facilitate the culture, like the culture that you're trying to achieve for yourself. Like, I think if you really can, especially if it's someone who's maybe an upperclassman or higher up, because they've got, although I don't think it even needs to be, I think younger kids can certainly do it, but oftentimes your experience isn't going the way you want it to because of the bigger picture, not just like this one isolated incident with you necessarily. And so I think if you can take agency over your experience, it helps sort of bleed that into other people's experiences, and they see you leading by example. They see you doing these things to try to mold your own time and experience, and that hopefully trickles down to other players, and they see that. And I think that's maybe subconsciously another form of that, like, leadership, of showing that, taking ownership over that.
Well, and that's, whether it's a team setting or a business setting, you may not, like, if you work in a massive company, well, you may not be able to affect the culture of the entire place, but you may be able to affect the culture of your department, your office. And I think that's where, instead of throwing your hands up, I can't do anything, whatever I do doesn't matter. Sure it does. And there's no telling how far it can spread, but at least you can affect the people in your immediate vicinity. And if it's a team setting, trying to get everyone to buy in, that's very difficult. And some of that you don't have control over. All you have control over is being consumed with doing your best in that sense, and hopefully it is attractive and meaningful to people around you.
Well, and to yourself. In that example where you work for a huge organization and you feel like your one job doesn't contribute a whole lot, or your ability to try to affect culture is going to be pretty small. Even if it only affects your immediate department, or if it only, like, it also affects you in the way that you step into work every day, or step into practice, or step into a meeting, whatever that is. That if okay, I might feel like I'm small fish in a big pond.
Right.
But if I'm gonna be if this is my situation, then I want to know that I'm here doing the very best that I can, taking all that action and effort to make it what I want it to be, even if it doesn't make a huge grander scale impact. I know that I did, I did the right thing and I made a good experience for my teammate and for myself, or my team and myself.
It's powerful to impact other people's lives like that. And that's, when we're looking for purpose or meaning or whatever in what we're doing, the vocation isn't necessarily, whatever. I guess you could be a nurse or a fireman or something where it's obvious, like part of your job is saving other people. Regardless, whatever your vocation is, it is a way for you to live out the things that you believe in and things you think are important, and to touch other people's lives and let people know they're cared for and they're not just invisible. And that's a powerful thing. I know. I can't remember which book it was that I was reading, but the example was a bus driver in New Orleans who he could have just said nothing to the people that got on the bus every morning, but instead, a lot of tourists, and he was happy to describe, landmarks and historical sites and entertainment
and make the best of it and make his experience good.
So he touches those people. He creates an experience that they don't forget, and it's meaningful to them, and he feels good about what he's doing as a result. So whatever it is we're doing, it's a people business. And from a leadership standpoint, we're trying to do everything we can to provide a rich, meaningful experience for the people we're leading. That includes taking the heat sometimes when that's just how it goes, or allowing or creating space where they can learn and grow. And that's, I don't know, people see if you care about them
100%.
And as people. And I was just listening to a podcast with Karch Karai and Gabby Reese, and Karch was talking about one of the things he really believes in that's crucial is that he's coaching people and not players. So he just took over the men's volleyball national team, and right now they're all over the world playing professionally, and he literally went on a tour all over the world to see them all and circled the globe. That's,
it matters.
That's a powerful example. Like, that's some impressive leadership. But that's why, obviously he was a fantastically successful player. The only gold medal that the women's Olympic team's ever won. He was head coach, and now he'll be coaching the men's Olympic team. So, I don't know. I think that was just a really powerful example to me of, not waiting around. Well, they're all over.
Right. I'll wait till they're back and we can.
And instead, he made sure to start connecting as fast as possible and in as meaningful a way as possible. If that's how you approach that, you obviously care about the people you're working with, then you become just much greater than the sum of your parts. When it's all said and done, you can look back like, yep, I gave it everything I had. It was very powerful, very meaningful. I'm proud of that. I guarantee you'll have those connections forever.
Yeah.
Like, people don't feel like a number, which is the whole point.
Yep.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Unbound Performance Podcast.
Your support helps us continue to build our community. If you're enjoying this content, please like, subscribe, and share.